Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Dino. Now, if you've been watching the channel for the last few weeks, you'll know that I showed you how to change the headlight bulb in my DR650, but I never did put the whole headlight assembly back into the bike, and there's a reason for that. I have a small project in my head that I want to work on, and I thought maybe today I would show you what that is and get started on it. So why don't you sit back, grab yourself something warm to drink, and enjoy Dino's Tinker Shed. It's getting sunny out here. I have a feeling snowmobile season might be wrapping up for the year. See you in a minute. When I bought my DR650 almost a year ago, I was so excited to get it out onto the road. But one thing that I found is there's not a lot of space on the custom fairing to have any kind of USB plugs or cigarette lighters, anything like that for a 12-volt power source. Now, I did kind of come up with this little miniature dashboard that sits on a ram mount mounted to the headlight frame assembly itself, and it served its purpose. It gave me a USB plug that I could plug my GPS into. It navigated me around, and overall it did okay. But what I found was it was lacking any kind of amenities. There's nowhere to say plug a 12-volt cigarette type plug in for, say, a tire pump or something to inflate an air mattress, or even a small spot to put a secondary fuse panel and relay to power those types of devices safely. Well, that led me to looking around the internet and looking at pictures and maybe purchasing an aftermarket fairing kit. But boy, oh boy, they're expensive. Some of them are like $1,100 to get like a rally style front fairing on a DR650, and I honestly don't want to pay that much. So after looking around, I thought, you know what, I can probably build something that will suit my needs based on some pictures of other fairings that I've seen on the internet. So today I want to show you kind of what I'm thinking of, and then over the next few weeks maybe build this dashboard and see if I can't get it to work the way that I would like it to give me just a little bit more space in there for a few amenities. Okay, why don't we take a look at what I'm thinking about right now. Well, this is what I'm kind of thinking of. What I've done here is I've used a bit of cardboard to mock up basically a headlight extension. It would push the actual headlight assembly out about 3 inches. This would give me room in here to mount a fuse panel and a relay that gets triggered by the keyed power switch that's inside here, and would allow me to put things like a 12-volt power circuit or USB plugs basically along the side of the box right here, make them really easy to get to. Now once that's done, the stock fairing would bolt right back on like this. It would move it out a little bit, but it would still look fairly stock. You can kind of see. It would just give this little extra space here to allow you to put accessories. Now, the other nice thing I like about this is it would give me a nice flat surface here to mount my GPS on, and it would be able to sort of get it off that silly mount with the spoon that's on the headlight assembly now. So my goal today is to take this mock-up that I've made and cut it out of aluminum and see if I can't get this thing put together. Now this is a big experiment for me. I have no idea whether this is going to work or not, but I'm willing to try it. So why don't you sit back and see what kind of trouble I can get into. Before I get too far along, I'm actually going to want to test fit the headlight. So I'll take off the ram mount here, and I'm going to save this spoon for camping. It's a pretty good spoon. And I'm also going to save the ram mount itself in case I decide to use it. Now the headlight does seem to fit into my prototype very well here. So I'm happy with this, so I'll actually take the cardboard prototype off of the bike and put it on the bench. But this is what your
bike looks like with the headlight and the fairing off, and those rubber mounts isolate the headlight from vibration.
For materials for the final dash, I'm going to use this aluminum sheet that I have. It's good and strong, it's durable, and I have enough little scraps of it laying around that I should have enough to make all the components that I need. Now, I would love to weld this together and make it look really good, but there's two reasons I won't do that. One is I don't have the skill to TIG weld this, and B, I don't have a TIG welder, and the welder that I do have is just a small flux core. It doesn't even have gas, so you can't even use a spool gun. So instead of that, I just went out and I bought a length of 3/4 inch aluminum angle, and I got this for $14.99 for an 8-foot piece, so I'll have lots of it for future projects as well. To join all the pieces together, well, I'm just going to use good old rivets. These will work fine. They're strong. I'm used to working on them with my snowmobiles. And you know what? In the end, I think it'll even look a little bit like an airplane dash, which I think is kind of cool.
Now that I've got the prototype on the bench, you can kind of see all the little cutouts and things that I've made in the cardboard, the top piece, and there's going to be a hinge in here. And I just kind of take a look, make sure everything looks right before I start taking it apart and make any notes that I need to make. I'll take it apart just using a razor knife and cutting all of the masking tape that I used to put it together. It's really Crafts 101 here. But I just want to take my time and make sure that I don't lose any of the pieces. Pieces that aren't so stable, I'll follow up and glue these down with hot glue just to make sure that when I trace it onto aluminum, the cardboard doesn't move. Now, I took the few pieces of scrap aluminum that I had here and laid it out as best I could. The side pieces are going to be on that little red piece of aluminum, and then the main pieces, like the upright and the front face and that, are all going to go on this other piece. So I'll lay some center lines out and basically take those cardboard cutouts and lay them down that center line, making marks along the aluminum where things need to be cut. Now for this upright piece, basically the dashboard itself, I'm going to actually make it a little bit wider than the cardboard template by about 10 millimeters on each side. And the reason I'm going to do this is I want to wrap around some molding around the edges of it. So I'll use this pie plate here and just round the edges so they look nice and smooth. To cut the aluminum, I'm just going to use some Bosch jigsaw blades here, just some metal cutting blades, and these work really good. They're high quality blade. They never seem to let me down. Now, if the aluminum was any thinner, a jigsaw might be a little bit hard to cut with, but this stuff's thick enough, and I do weight it down with this tow bar from my truck that adds enough weight that makes it stable. So I'll just cut along all of the different angles, roughing out the shapes. Now, this isn't obviously the most accurate because jigsaws, especially if you don't have any kind of guide on them, tend to wander a little bit, but it worked okay. And I always come in and clean up all the aluminum as I go, and I'll use a wire brush here just to lift it up off the rubber. As I said before, jigsaws aren't the most precise, so I'll use a file and I'll stack the two matching pieces together and make them exactly the same shape and size. Now because this is aluminum, it tends to bind up the file, and I'll just use a wire brush to clean it out. And for areas where there's a little bit more material, I'll use a flap disc to bring the majority of it down before I follow that up with a file. Now once I get that done, I pull the plastic off here, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to get off, so I'll just heat it over top of my heater here, and then it scrapes off really easy just with a plastic scraper. And here you can see the majority of the pieces are all done. Now I'll trace out over those brackets that mount the factory headlight, and I'll use those and transfer them back over to those side pieces here. So I've put a couple reference lines on there, and then I'll just use an awl to mark the actual centers of the holes. I'll bring those over to the vise and I'll drill these out so that they completely match side to side. Drill through both pieces basically. Now I'm going to chamfer these a little bit. You have to be careful because you can over chamfer thin material, but I just want to get the burrs off of this stuff. Then I'll put a couple clecos in here and it'll hold everything together. These clecos are super handy. They'll allow you to keep the piece fixtured essentially. Then I'll drill out those holes to 6 millimeter so they'll fit a 6 millimeter bolt. Next, I'll fasten those side plates back into the bike here, just to make sure that everything looks right and then it fits good too. Everything looks really good here, so I'm going to start laying out some of the brackets. So these will be used to fasten the different pieces together, and this is a good opportunity. I can mark them and I can cut them out at the vise here. And just add them to the pile. Now, I decided to use some 2" by 1/8" thick aluminum strap here for some of the pieces. The bottom of the dashboard being one now. It does seem to interfere with all these cables, so I'll have to cut some clearance out of this. And this is one of the reasons I went with the thicker material, is there's not a lot of material left once you cut out the clearance. So I'll just use one of these step drills. I started with my M12 here, but really this is a little bit too much for the battery powered drill, so I'll break out the 1/2" hole shooter here. This thing's a beast, it'll twist your arms off. And sometimes it pays off just to grab the corded drill. They're a good value and they'll go through just about anything. And you can see here it makes short work of this 1/8" aluminum. I'll just follow it up by cutting out that straight line with the disc grinder and then flap wheeling it all so it's nice and smooth. And I do use a file here also to clean it up, but the goal is to get it nice and straight and flat. Now here, there's a little spot on the ignition key that needs a relief cut in it. So I'll use a rasp here and just keep cutting down until it makes a nice hole. I don't have any real machining tools other than this kind of stuff. And I'll just step up rasp sizes until I get it to the size that I need to clear the little nub in the ignition. This looks really good. And then I'll test fit the headlight in here as well, just to make sure it sits level, which it does. It looks really, really good. And I'll test fit the fairing over top of it as well. Now it's going to fit, but I do have to remove my Insta360 mount that I made for the top of the fender to get the right clearance, but I'll do that later. Now these brackets here, I want to rivet them right down the center, which is about 3/8 of an inch down in there. Now to make sure that they're all lined up right, I laid out where I want rivets, along here, and along here, and along here. And to get the spacing right, I made myself a little jig. So this registers on the edge here, and then I line that center line up. Then I can mark these with a Sharpie. I'll stack these plates and drill these ones and these ones straight through, but these ones up here, because this piece here is a little bit funny shaped, it's going to fit like this on one side, but on the other side it's going to be a little bit different, so I'll have to adjust that. So let's get working and we'll drill these out. So I'll start by putting the two pieces together with those X's facing inside, and I'll just use those M6 bolts to fasten them together and hold them so everything is exactly on the same plane. Once that's done, I'll center punch all of the holes that I marked out, and then I'll clamp it into the vise and I'll start to drill these holes out. Now, I probably should have went downstairs and drilled these on my drill press to be the most accurate, but I think overall this is pretty good. I can keep it fairly level, and there's enough mobility within the rivets that you can get it lined up pretty well. Now you can see here I sort of countersunk that top hole a little bit too much, and this is the danger of these countersinks. Sometimes just a flat file works better for deburring, but I will follow these up again with some more Clecos just to hold everything in alignment as I move it in the vise. These things work really well. Now here's just a little trick if you've got one of these Jacobs chucks here. If it ever comes loose on you, there's actually a little bit of a trick to this. You tighten it down as tight as you can, and then you actually turn it back till it clicks. And that actually locks the chuck so it won't open up on you. Now for years, this chuck used to spin open when I would stop, because it's got a brake on it. It would spin open. This way it stays closed. It works really good too, if I can ever get it in the hole. Now with all the holes drilled in the main plates, I'm going to align them with the brackets, and then I want to drill through the holes in the plates through the brackets. This way everything lines up. And again, I'm going to follow this up with clecos. I know I keep saying cleco, 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 but they are very, very handy when you're assembling stuff like this, because you can put the entire piece together like this and test fit it, but you can still take it apart if there's problems. You don't have to re-drill the rivets. These things work really well. They're good for fabricators like myself that maybe aren't too skilled. Now I'm going to test the dashboard. It seems to fit well, but I do need an angled bracket for it to rest on the very top of the front plate. So I'm going to use the vise and bend a piece of this aluminum channel until it matches the angle that I have here on this bracket. And you can see overall this is a pretty good fit. It just took a little bit of tweaking, but I think it'll do pretty well. It lines up here really nicely. Now I do need to cut the ends off to add some relief on that bent piece, so I'll cut down with a hacksaw, and then I'll just use the grinder here to cut that little tab off. And what this will do, you'll see in a minute, it allows this angled piece to sit over top of the brackets that come right to the very top of the side pieces. It's not a big deal, but it just makes it look a little nicer. So you can see here's the angled pieces. Now the piece that we made will actually fit in and around those upright brackets like this. It fits in really good, nice and tight, and you can see it actually will stay without any kind of riveting. But I do follow this up now with drilling and clecos.
Now that cross piece that I've got held in place right now can actually be permanently riveted in. I can remove the clecos on the side plates and still take that apart for the rest of the drilling that I need to do, but that one sort of angled support piece can actually be riveted in place now. So here's what I'm going to use here. These little rivets, they're really cheap. If you've never used a rivet gun, they're really easy, and it's a quick way to sort of join a couple pieces of sheet metal, whether it's aluminum or steel. Now, hand rivet guns like this are great. They're for, maybe a couple dozen rivets, but it does get a little bit tiring on the wrist as you sort of manipulate this gun. But they're cheap. They're like 35 bucks, 40 bucks. You can get one of these on Amazon, and they usually come with a starter pack of rivets of different lengths. Now for me, I'm going to break out my air riveter. Now I bought this for a John Deere Spitfire snowmobile that I renovated a number of years ago. And if you have a lot of rivets to put in, that's the way to go, and that's what I'm going to use today. So let's get it hooked up to the air compressor. We'll put a few rivets in and get those few clecos out of that little bent support. Let's get it done.
This air riveter really does make this job simple, and the process is really easy. Basically, I'll remove one of the clecos here, and then I'll place a rivet into those holes, making sure that the head is nice and flush. Next, I'll put the air tool over top and pull the nail through the rivet, and what this does is it expands the back of the rivet holding the two pieces together. I'll just keep doing this. Sometimes I have to drill the hole out just to make sure the rivet goes in smooth, but again, overall, the project's really easy to do. Now I mount it back on the bike here with a few clecos left just to make sure that everything fits right before I finalize those last few rivets. And I think it looks pretty good. It seems to fit well. I like the look of it. I'm pretty happy.
Well, that looks pretty good. And I think that's probably a good time to end this part of the video. It's been a couple days I've been working on this thing, getting all the aluminum prepared and cut and sort of figured out in my head. I'll finish off the rest of the riveting today, and then the shell's done. And there's not a whole lot left, but I did dry fit it on the bike here. I think it looks pretty good. The tolerances are nice, the headlight fits in good. I do need to do a little bit of spacing. However, next video, we still need to figure out how I'm going to wire this up, where I'm going to put the fuse panel in here, what kind of power ports I'm going to have on it, that kind of thing. And I still need to paint the overall shell and dress it up a little bit. I got a couple ideas to make it look a little bit better. So I'm not sure whether I'm going to paint this thing white or I'm going to paint it matte black. I'm not 100% sure, but why don't you leave a comment down below if you have an opinion on that, and I'll take a look at it. And I would really like to thank everybody for stopping by. I know this is kind of an odd project. I hope you find it interesting and maybe it'll inspire you to do something similar. But until then, I'm Dino. I'll see you soon back here on Dino's Tinker Shed. Got a bit more riveting to do before I call it a night.